Hello, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, which is a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guest may not represent those of the host of the station. Folks, as usual, I have a phenomenal guest with me today. All my guests are phenomenal, and I learn from each guest. And with me today is Dr. John J. Berger, who is an environmental advocate, journalist, and innovator, also an environmental science and policy specialist, prize-winning author, and involved in many writing articles for different publications. He has been a consultant to the National Research Council of the National Academy of Sciences and the U.S. Congress, as well as a professor at the University of Maryland. John co-founded the Nuclear Information and Resource Service and founded Restoring the Earth to bring environmental restoration to national attention. And we're going to discuss Dr. Berger's book today, Solving the Climate Crisis. Frontline reports from the race to save the earth. Introduction by Senator Russ Feingold. Welcome, Dr. John J. Berger, to Chatting with Betsy.
Thank you very much, Betsy. It's a pleasure to be here talking with you today.
And it is a pleasure talking to you. I have to say, in my own opinion, Dr. Berger, or would you prefer for me to call you John?
Whatever you're comfortable with is perfectly fine with me.
Okay. I like to give respect to the title. I live in New Jersey, and I can tell you, I have seen climate change happen here.
Yes.
Never saw a winter. This past winter, we had such torrential rain. I never saw such a rainy winter in my life. And I lived in New Jersey most of my life, and we're just getting more and more storms. So I just have to throw that out there to the audience. But I have to ask you, what motivated you to write your book? And thank you for writing your book.
Well, I think that, to put it succinctly, I was motivated by my intense concern about the threat of global climate change and the evidence that I have already seen amply of type of threat and the impact of climate change. I wanted to see if I could put my 2 cents in and do whatever I could to try and accelerate the national transition to clean energy, and also to do whatever I could on the global stage as well. And I know that that is extremely ambitious, and basically no one person can do all of that, but I just felt that I had to try, because I felt that I have some knowledge about clean energy alternatives that we are not putting into play amply and adequately enough. So I wanted to be an advocate for clean energy and for a safe climate.
I commend you for that. How long did it take you to research and write this book?
I think that it really depends on when you consider that I began. It's a little arbitrary, because I've been reading and studying about clean energy and the climate for decades now, and I've written 3 previous books on climate change. So if you just look at the time spent on this particular book, I really got going on it in 2015. So it's been about 8 years that I was working on it, and then 1 year the book was in production. It takes a long time to do a book like this.
Yes, and I have to say, one particular topic, or I should say gratitude that I have now, Dr. John. I'll call you Dr. John, because I always have to do the respectful thing. I was brought up that way. Plus, I worked as a nurse So is the gratitude for authors, writers, because, we pick up a book, we take it for granted, but the years of research that go into a book, sometimes years, is just mind-boggling to me, that an author or writer takes so much of their time to write a book that they're so passionate about, especially a cause that they're passionate about, as you are, with clean energy and climate change. And, can you explain to the audience, because some people may think, well, what's clean energy?
Clean energy is energy that is produced without burning fossil fuel, and ideally without burning any fuel. We can get energy from the sun, from the wind, from falling water, from the earth, the heat of the earth, geothermal energy, and geothermal power if we use that heat to generate electricity, and we can get power from the waves and from the tides. These are all sustainable, infinite, fuel-free sources of energy that don't produce any greenhouse gases. And as you know, when we burn carbon fuels like oil, coal, natural gas, tar sands, or things of that sort, we are producing not only various kinds of serious air pollutants, but we're also producing carbon dioxide, which is the principal greenhouse gas, which heats the earth by creating essentially a blanket of gas around the earth in the atmosphere that reflects heat back to the earth and does not allow it to escape out into space. We have to, therefore, reduce the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We can do that throughout our entire economy by substituting clean, sustainable, renewable energy for energy that requires combustion.
I have to tell you something funny, Dr. John. Since I grew up in New Jersey, I used to think the factories were making clouds.
I understand, yes. That's very funny.
I would see that, I thought, oh, that's how the clouds are made. And in my area, which was a lot of factories, and a lot of them have closed since I was a child, the air would stink so bad, especially where I went to my first school. It smelled like rotten eggs, and you couldn't even have the windows open. And that was terrible, when it was hot out. And I think of that air and the people exposed to that and who had to work with it.
Globally,
they must
Betsy?
Have, yes. Go ahead.
I was going to say that globally, 7.5 to 8 million people every year die from exposure to air pollution, 90% of which is caused by the burning of fossil fuels. So one tremendous benefit we get when we convert our economy, both nationally and globally, to rely entirely on clean energy sources, we will then be virtually eliminating air pollution. Think what it would be like to just breathe fresh air all the time and not be worried about air pollution. And when I mentioned 7.5 to 8 million people dying every year from air pollution, these are deaths that do not have to occur if we were to convert ourselves entirely to reliance on clean energy. Moreover, there are hundreds of millions of people, not just a few million, who are sickened by air pollution exposure every year. And the cost of all of this is just enormous to the world economy, not to mention the human suffering in terms of costs.
Absolutely. They call the area where I live Cancer Alley because of the pollution that is so awful. Like I said, some of these factories have closed down since the 60s and 70s, but my husband, he used to work for a company that's known for chemicals. I won't say the name of the company, but they had a problem way back, I think it was in the 80s, early 90s in India, and his clothes stunk when he came home.
Mm-hmm.
They just reeked.
Yeah.
And I think I read recently, Dr. John, and I don't know if you've heard anything about this, that they're saying a correlation of air pollution might even cause Alzheimer's.
I'm not personally familiar with that, but I would not be at all surprised. We do know that it can cause various kinds of lung and heart disorders and probably hypertension. I don't know. But suffice it to say that it's not beneficial to human health, and it's discretionary in a sense. We do not have to do this to other people and to the common atmosphere we all share.
Yes, and then with pesticides, I mean, I know things have changed since the 60s, but when I think of how they used to go around with the trucks and spray that pesticide, of course, crazy kids, we used to ride our bikes right into the cloud of it and breathe it in, and you wonder how that affected the environment, how that affected the quality of air. Not to mention the spray that came out.
It had a terrible impact, and it's not over. People are still doing that periodically in California when they try to eradicate some type of very serious pest that is affecting fruits and vegetables. They will go around with those trucks and spray everywhere. But in developing countries, it's quite common to abuse pesticides. One thing that I point out in my book, Solving the Climate Crisis, is that we can have an agriculture that relies on nature as a form of pest control. We don't have to douse the soil in pesticides and herbicides and chemical fertilizers. I write about a rancher and farmer named Gabe Brown who lives in North Dakota, and he has a ranch called Brown's Ranch there, and he raises livestock and vegetables. He has a total of about 140 agricultural products that he and his family produce on that land, and it's also available for people to come and do some hunting. I don't know, probably for grouse or pheasant. I'm not a big advocate of hunting, but I'm trying to make a point here that Gabe Brown was not an environmentalist per se, but he became aware that pesticides and herbicides were killing the beneficial fungi and bacteria in the soil, and that was reducing soil fertility. Modern industrial agriculture is exploitative agriculture that mines the soil of nutrients. In order to have healthy plants and healthy animals and healthy people, you need to have healthy soil. And Gabe Brown found that by keeping cover crops in the ground, it would protect the soil from erosion, and it would also nourish the soil because the roots of these cover crops would eventually die, and when they died, they would decompose, and the nutrients in the roots would become incorporated into the soil. Gradually also, with the natural manure of the animals grazing over the land, it's much like the bison had done for thousands of years. And that ecosystem, the Great Plains and the prairies of the United States, then built up a very thick topsoil, many feet thick. And Gabe Brown found that he was able to replicate these natural processes that have been in play since time immemorial. They serve to enrich the soil, fertilize it, And carbon is actually like the fuel for soil ecosystems. So as the plants grew healthier, they would pull more CO2, that is carbon dioxide, out of the atmosphere, and then those molecules of CO2 would become incorporated in the leaves, the stems, the shoots, the roots, and ultimately into the soil. The plants, being healthy, would have nodules of nitrogen-fixing bacteria on their roots, and that would take nitrogen out of the atmosphere. So the farmer gets basically free fertilizer and can save the money that was spent on herbicides and pesticides and artificial fertilizer. So it's a win-win situation, not only for the land and for the environment and for the climate, because it pulls greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, but a win-win for the farmer's bank account.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. That was my next thing, was to ask you what is a regenerative agriculture. And that's what you were just talking about.
Yeah, I was talking about it. It has many aspects to it. You can do it on rangeland. We have hundreds of millions more acres of rangeland than we do of cropped land. And on rangeland, if you spread a thin dusting of compost on the land, that compost has 19 to 1 ratio of carbon to nitrogen, and it eventually works its way into the soil, nourishes and energizes the soil, jumpstarts the soil ecosystem so that the soil becomes healthier, the plants become healthier, they pull more carbon out of the atmosphere in a virtuous cycle. So you gradually find that after this one application of compost, you then have years and years of increased productivity, increased fertility. The farmer and rancher benefits from this. I mentioned economically, but yields go up and the quality of the produce and the livestock improves when it's grown on healthy soil.
Well, I'm excited about
globally,
that.
By the way, Betsy, this could actually be a way of removing huge amounts of greenhouse gas from the atmosphere if we scale up this technology and we provide financial incentives and carbon credits to farmers for improving their soil by incorporating tons of greenhouse gases in the soil. And that's what these technologies do. So you can imagine you have millions of acres of rangeland and cropland. If you put these resources to work at the same time as you're making them healthier and more productive and more profitable, you're also pulling more carbon and other greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere.
That is very important. I'm excited about that, Dr. John, and I'll tell you why. I'm a big advocate for a lot of medical causes. 3 years ago, I interviewed 2 doctors about Parkinson's, and they mentioned the use of pesticides and insecticides that are known to cause neurological problems. And they want to get, rid of that. And it's very important. People don't realize what we breathe in, what we eat affects our brains and our nervous system. So
that's very true. Yeah, that's very true. So we need to just go to a different model of agriculture from the industrial agricultural model to the regenerative agricultural model. These are really rediscoveries rather than reinventions of agriculture, because indigenous peoples have used these techniques for many years. In fact, Gabe Brown, whom I mentioned earlier, studied he learned about the techniques that the Mandan Indians had used historically in North Dakota, where they would plant corn and squash and tobacco together. And these crops would be synergistic, sort of co-collaborators in making a healthy plants and healthy soil. He learned that by reading the diaries of Lewis and Clark, who had gone through North Dakota on their exploration of the United States, which was not then the United States as we know it, of course, but they were exploring virtually wilderness territories. About 1806, I think, was when they crossed North Dakota and wintered there with the Mandan Indians and wrote about their agricultural techniques in the diaries of Lewis and Clark.
The old time, going back to the old time methods is, I think, what we should be doing. My grandparents, my mother's parents, came from Russia, which is now considered Ukraine, but my grandmother would say, the vegetables were different there. They were fresh. Everything was so fresh. And, of course, you're talking over 100 years ago. And you know what? My grandmother lived, God bless her, till she was almost 95. Was it 90? No, yes. 93. Yes. She was almost 93.
I'm sure.
But, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm concerned with?
Pesticides and chemicals take their toll on us. We all have various kinds of plastics in our bloodstream.
Yes, that is a big thing now, Dr. John. It's the plastics in the water and what you call the forever chemicals.
Yes.
Again, I live in
PFAs or PFCs.
Yes, I live in New Jersey, and they changed the water pipes. But we received a letter, I think, of 2 or 3 years ago, about those chemicals, and then you wonder, and it had a list of what it could cause in someone, and then you wonder, oh, is that why I have high cholesterol? Is that why I have this problem? Because of the water? And you hear about, I just read about the corals being bleached by the heat temperature with the ocean. I mean, that is just mind-blowing. And the chemicals that we're putting into the water, that go into the ocean, that go into the streams, that are poisoning the fish that we're eating. And it just seems like a vicious cycle, Dr. John.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. I agree with you.
It's very alarming to me. And where I live, I don't know how these people fish in these polluted waters and eat what they catch, because the water is so polluted, it's disgusting. I don't know. I would not eat any fish from certain areas in New Jersey.
Yes.
That's for sure.
Well, it's very good that there are organizations that are working to protect wildlife and to protect fish and to protect all kinds of species. Each species practically has its own advocate, but that's a strength and also a liability for the climate and environmental movement, because this movement really needs to get together and have a common platform so that we will protect nature and the environment from excessive contamination of the atmosphere, which A, we breathe, and B, which causes this pervasive threat to civilization and human life, namely the threat from global climate change.
Yes, I have to ask you a question. This might sound like a bizarre question. Do you think...
Not at all.
That I think of in a way like climate change, that the Earth is getting older. So it would make sense to me that it's getting hotter because it's getting older. But also if you add the pollution to it, it could be two reasons why there's climate change. Do you think I'm a little wacky for thinking that?
No, I think that primarily the Earth is not getting hotter because it's getting older. I think that, if anything, the Earth is probably cooling. I'm not a geophysicist, but the major cause of climate change is not the heat from the Earth itself. It's the heat-trapping gases that human beings are releasing into the atmosphere. Now, many people are totally unaware of what the atmosphere is made of. They're unaware of what carbon dioxide is, what carbon dioxide does. A quarter of the people in the United States still think that the sun revolves around the Earth rather than the opposite, which Copernicus discovered in about, 500 years ago. So this is a big problem of scientific illiteracy that causes people to be bamboozled by misinformation from the fossil fuel industry. I wrote a book in 2013 called Climate Myths, the Campaign Against Climate Science, when I went through all of these popular myths that the fossil fuel industry was purveying that have led to really kind of roadblocks in Congress that have prevented the kinds of climate legislation that should be adopted in order to really accelerate the clean transition. We should have a planned phase out of all coal and natural gas power in the electricity sector. We should have a new clean energy finance corporation, a new clean energy set of treasury bonds, and a national program to electrify everything, because electricity can be provided cleanly from solar and wind and geothermal and hydro and energy storage. So when we do this, we clean up every sector of the environment, even so-called recalcitrant sectors like cement and like steel. We can clean them all up. And I met with people in these industries throughout my travels, and I can tell you stories of how we could clean up every single sector of the economy. When we do this and we move from using fossil fuels, which we set on fire, which is a little bit like burning money, we also save a tremendous amount of energy, because when we burn these fuels to produce electricity, for example, we lose about 2/3 of the energy in the fuel, which is dissipated as waste heat typically. Now, it doesn't have to be. It could be captured and used in a district heating system, which is a better solution if you're burning the fossil fuel anyway. But the superior solution, the best alternative, is to move to electrification of everything: transportation, buildings, industry, commerce, you name it. So these are a couple of things, and I mentioned. Go ahead, please.
Oh, I was wondering. They're very interesting, and I was wanted to ask you about the electric cars.
Yeah, what would you like to say about them, or ask me about them?
Because I know that it's heading that way. I'm just concerned. Like, I wouldn't mind having an electric car if I could afford it, but we need the stations, and I don't think the United States has the structure for it, that they're ready for that.
I see. I got you. These are transitional problems. By maybe 2028, 2030, electric vehicles are going to be much cheaper or on a par in terms of sticker price with internal combustion engine vehicles. In addition, you're going to have the benefit of lower operating costs, because electricity is going to be cheaper than gasoline or diesel, and already is much cheaper. And the electric vehicle is much more energy efficient than the fossil fuel vehicle. Plus, it's much simpler and more elegant, so therefore maintenance costs are a whole lot lower, and the life cycle costs are definitely a great deal lower. So on every metric, people are going to want to buy electric cars. We're in this transition period, moving from one technology to the other, and there are some, pardon the expression, roadblocks here. One of them is that we don't have enough charging stations. Another problem is that the charging takes too long. But in 2 or 3 years, probably you'll be able to get a charge that'll take you 100 miles in 3 minutes. So fueling is not going to be too different in terms of the time lag from the fueling of an ordinary car today. So basically, in every respect, it's going to be better and more attractive to people. And I think that by 2030, the vast majority of new vehicles will be electric vehicles. Why would you want to buy a car that is worse on so many metrics? And in terms of range, by that time, the high-end electric vehicles by 2030 will be capable of going 600 or 700 miles. The normal electric vehicle will be going 400 or 500 miles. It's far more than you actually need, and more than the internal combustion vehicle. Nobody needs to really have, I shouldn't say nobody, but the vast majority of drivers have no reason to need a vehicle that goes more than 500 miles on a charge. How long are you going to drive anyway? Mm-hmm. People need to rest and sleep and stay overnight or have lunch and things of that sort. So the range anxiety that was one of the hallmarks of the early electric vehicle, that's pretty much going to be a thing of the past. So electric vehicles are going to they're going to rule the road, basically. And that's true for trucks and true for buses and true for trains, too.
Yes, I think, it's just like when Ford created the car, they had to work out the kinks. And I think with the electric vehicles, they're seeing how it works now. They had to iron out some of the problems. I'm sure it'll be improved as the years go on. Do you think the U.S. has the grid for that, for all the EV stations?
I'm not sure what you mean by the grid for it. I think that it's just a question of building them out. It's something that is pretty straightforward. We have the technology, and to do it, you need to just make the decision to make the investment, and it pays off in terms of the climate benefits and in terms of the economic benefits, because people will be saving money. The cars will be cheaper, and they'll be cheaper to operate. So why wouldn't we want to make that investment? It's going to pay itself off in a fairly reasonable amount of time.
That'll be interesting. I just saw on TV yesterday a flying car. Reminded me of the cartoon I used to watch back in the 60s, the Jetsons.
Yes,
do you think...
I think I actually mentioned that in Solving the Climate Crisis, just pretty much as a laugh line.
Would that be electric? I guess would that be electric capacity, the flying cars?
I believe,
because that sounds cool to me.
It could be. Yeah, it'll be a vertical takeoff and landing vehicle. They'll be initially quite expensive, but eventually maybe we'll have Ubers of the air that will allow you to leapfrog over, traffic congestion. I think
cool.
The answer is not for everybody to have their own little helicopter. The answer is to have really good public transportation.
Yes.
And that we ought to be investing in that, probably in preference to pouring tens or hundreds of billions of dollars into highways, which is basically a subsidy for the fossil fuel industry. And the fossil fuel industry globally already enjoys a $7 trillion annual subsidy, and in the United States we're subsidizing it to the tune of $646 billion a year in implicit and explicit subsidies. we should not be subsidizing what we don't want. We should not be paying and encouraging a more dangerous environment and greater threats to the climate. This is, by the way, ridiculous on every level. It's a mature industry that's making trillions of dollars a year. Why are taxpayers being asked to provide its subsidies? There's no rational universe in which that makes any sense. And if we stop pouring money into fossil fuels, we spend about $1 trillion a year on fossil fuels in the United States alone. We should turn this cataract of money, this fire hose of money, and begin using it to invest in clean, renewable, sustainable, everlasting technologies based on solar and wind and geothermal power and heat. If we do that, we will be astonished to see how quickly we could transform this economy to rely on these sources. In Copenhagen, for example, in 2009, they made a decision to become carbon neutral by 2025. Well, they didn't quite make it, but in 13 years, they reduced their carbon footprint by 80%. We could do things of that nature too. We are not being ambitious enough by setting goals to reduce our carbon emissions to zero by 2050. We need to do it much, much more quickly, and we need to prioritize it. We need a national declaration of a climate emergency in this country. And then we need to be following a national climate prosperity plan to rationally chart an optimal path to a clean energy economy. We also ought to have a national climate report to the nation, just like a State of the Union report. The president should get up every year and report to Congress on how well we're doing in reducing our emissions. Ordinary people do not realize the costs and the impacts and the threats and dangers of what's happening to the environment and what's happening to the climate and what is coming at us. The Potsdam Research Institute recently issued a report saying that by 2050, damages from climate change will total $38 trillion a year, and that those damages are pretty much baked in now. So unless we want to make that situation even worse, we better get busy very, very quickly. We are heading towards a situation like the one that Bangladesh and Southeast Asia and South Central Asia are having now, where they're being scorched by heat waves that are basically providing or producing temperatures that are killing people. And we know that by 2070, something like 1 billion to 1.5 billion people will be in areas of the world that every year reach temperatures that will be impossible for humans to survive without air conditioning or without some other special assistance. So this is a threat to human life. And long before that happens, the droughts and the other bouts of extreme weather are going to whip up tides of hundreds of millions, if not more than 1 billion refugees. If we think we have a refugee problem on our southern border now, wait a decade or two and see how things go. We need to treat this as the cataclysmic emergency that it is, and we better start acting with commensurate seriousness about it. This is not one of 17 priorities. This is number one priority. It's more important than some economic stimulus program or a war of choice that we decide to fight somewhere in the Middle East or elsewhere. We spend trillions of dollars on these things, but we nickel and dime spending on the climate crisis.
Well, Dr. John J. Berger, I so appreciate you coming on. I know you're passionate about the climate and the environment, and thank you for
you're
sharing.
very, very welcome.
With the
My pleasure,
audience,
Betsy.
and teaching me and enlightening me. I so appreciate that. Where can people get in touch with you and learn more about you? And folks, I highly recommend you research Dr. John J. Berger at the Berger, because you can't understand my Jersey accent. Where can they find you?
Well, one thing they can do is they can go to solvingtheclimatecrisis.us, which is one of my websites. I have another website, johnjberger.com. People could also write to me at john@johnjberger.com. And look forward to hearing from your listeners.
Well, thank you so much. And your book is available on your website and also the major...
If you go to solvingtheclimatecrisis.us, you'll find many ways to order it. And I encourage people to also go to their local independent bookstore. The book is there or it can be ordered. And we need to support local independent businesses.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Dr. John J. Berger.
My pleasure.
You're welcome. You're welcome. My pleasure. Author and writer of Solving the Climate Crisis, Frontline Reports from the Race to Save the Earth. Very important book to read, folks. I highly recommend getting on the computer, tablet, order this book, read it, and see what we can do, individuals, to help with this climate crisis and make our environment better to live in. And it's not for us and for our children, or if you have grandchildren, great-grandchildren down the line. It's important. And I want to thank everyone for listening. If you don't already subscribe to Chatting with Betsy, it is for free on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Music, Apple, to name a few. And I want to encourage everyone to read the blog because it will have information about Dr. John J. Berger. Jeannie White, her station manager, writes and produces the show. So thank you, Jeannie. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Passion World Talk Radio, who makes this all possible. And again, thank you for listening, subscribing. Share this show with your friends because I have phenomenal guests on. I learn from every guest. I just learned a wealth of information today with Dr. Berger. Opened my eyes. And, let's have an open mind. Let's learn and see how we can make this world better to live in. It's really important. And again, Dr. John Berger, I want to thank you for coming on, writing your book, and for your passion for what you do and to educate others.
Well, you're very welcome, Betsy. Thank you very much for inviting me to the show. I really appreciate it.
Sure. My pleasure. And folks, as I always say at the end of the show, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind, shine your light bright, because we need it now more than I think any other time. And if you want to learn more about me, you could just check me out on my Facebook page, Betsy E. Wurzel, Wurzel. And if you are looking for a support group, please join #Kick Alzheimer's Ass Movement on Facebook. And that's it for today. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Bye-bye now.